Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video. Today I am with the legend that is Gnostic Informant, Neil Sendlak, who returned my Easter call of desperation saying, I really want to do a live chat today because I get withdrawal symptoms. Do you fancy a chat and an interview? And he came to my rescue. So thank you so much.
I rose on the third day. Here I am.
It is the day. This is it.
Yep.
Well done. Thank you for joining me. And in fact, I have an apology to make because that we are talking again next week with two universalists, and we've got that in the diary. But as you know, we had real trouble trying to work out the date and the time zones and whatnot, and so we went through about 5 dates and times before settling on the one we've got. But I forgot to change it in StreamYard, so I just checked. There were some people waiting on the live chat saying, "Yeah, I'm waiting for this. Really looking forward to this talk." And of course, we were never there.
Oh, really? Is that what happened?
Yeah, so I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't change the date, but
We're supposed to go live.
Oh man. So anyway, this is my apology, which is instead I apologize, and here's Neil on a taster session.
Teaser, a little teaser.
So I have to say thank you very much to Neil as well as Derek Lambert of Myth Vision for both of them when I was getting this channel up and running, and it still is in that kind of process. You interviewed me a number of times and gave me, a space to say my stuff. So I really appreciate that. So thank you.
And thank you, because when I started this channel last summer, met Derek. Derek helped me get off the ground, and you were one of the first videos that I did that got like 10,000 or more views. Did you know that?
Yeah, well, yeah. So the heaven and hell one, and we're trying to work out why it was. I think it's just random.
Just took off in the algorithm, and I was like, dude, you're coming back next week. Let's do another one. I did like 3 in a row with you just to see how the algorithm, and it turned out the next one kind of was pretty big too.
Yeah.
Like we had like 3 good videos together, but it was a good conversation too.
Yeah, and that's the main thing. Yeah. And in fact, so where can you find Neil? Gnostic Informant. So here's his YouTube channel. Check him out. He's got loads of great content on there, speaking and has spoken to loads of really great people. I think you're just saying you're just finishing editing a video with Dennis McDonald and another scholar where they are discussing. Well, you tell us what they're discussing.
Oh, Dionysus and the Eucharist. It's Kyle Ruck and Dennis McDonald, both from my Harvard PhDs. One's a classicist, the other one's a New Testament scholar. And I brought them together and had a really good conversation. That's going to be up tonight, so look out for that.
Excellent. Good stuff. Well, I'm interested to get the ball rolling today. Before we go on to talk about like the resurrection, we're going to talk about how ridiculous some of the specifically Christian claims are, to the point where I can't even believe we entertain them as much as we do. That's something we're going to talk about a little bit later, which I'm quite excited about. But I'm interested in your deconversion, your story, because you, unlike me, were a committed Christian. I was a Christian as a kind of teenager, but my understanding of Christianity was so wrong that, like, it's interesting as whether I could be classified as a Christian, and no true Scotsman fallacy, maybe. But you were more of a fundamentalist Christian. Talk us through your upbringing, how you got into Christianity, and then how you got out of it.
So I didn't grow up as a fundamentalist. I came from a family that was really sort of liberal. Like nobody was religious. I had like the one crazy uncle that was, he became a born again Christian, but he was living in the West Coast, so I never got involved in that or anything. But anyways, so I grew, I was always just, getting into parties and high school and just your average typical American kid, right? And I actually did end up living in a time period where in Buffalo, where I'm at, in Buffalo, New York, where there was an opiate epidemic. And I was right in the middle of it. And like a lot of other people my age, got addicted to that stuff. Long story short, I ended up in prison. And when I was in prison, I read the Bible cover to cover. And it's something about being in a position when you're really down, hitting rock bottom, that the New Testament speaks to those type of people. Like there's the parable of the lost son who squanders his money away, and he finds himself in a faraway land, and he next thing he realizes that he's eating with the pigs, like the pigs that are in the farm that he's working for. He's eating their food because he has no food, he has no money, and he's thinking to himself, "Look at where I'm at. Look where my life ended up. If I go back to my own father's farm and repent, my father will make me a worker and I'll be higher than I am today. Whereas maybe I'm not I don't have my inheritance like my other brother does, the good brother, which you can actually interpret as the Jew, because it's like the two sons, the Gentile and the Jew. The Gentile is the one who, he's the partier. He's into the heathen stuff, right? But the point of the parable is God is actually just looking for the one who has faith, not the one who's righteous. He doesn't care about works. He cares about faith. So what happens in this parable is the son returns to his father, and his father throws a big banquet for him. And the good son, who never left, never squanders his money away, who follows his father's teachings and father's ways, and never got in trouble, is like, hey, what the heck? I've been here the whole time. I never did anything wrong. He spends his money abroad on hookers and whatever, and then he comes back and you throw a party for him and not me? And the father's like, hey, listen, what your son did or what your brother did is better than anything, because he could have been dead and he's back. Don't worry, you're fine. You don't have to worry about nothing. It's basically like this weird like parable about like it's relatable to the other parable where the lady who's poor gives her 1 penny, but it's worth more than the one who gives half of a million pennies. I'm just throwing numbers out there. It's basically the parables all sort of relate in that sense, where it's like it's all about aiming at a specific person, the downtrodden, the weak, the meek, the poor. That's who they're aiming at. And that's where I'm in prison now. Back to my story. I'm in prison. I'm reading the Bible, and it's speaking to me because I'm like a person who's in a really bad place in life. So I read this Bible, and I'm like, oh, this is it. This is the word of God. It's speaking to me. So when I got out of there, went to a church. It was a Baptist evangelical fundamentalist church, and the rest was history. I was there for years and did the podcasting for the church. I was at a pastor who was just completely right-wing, conservative, hardcore. Every word is true in the King James Bible. Not one of it. It's perfect, pure. It's the word of God. The world is 6,000 years old. Adam and Eve literally existed. The flood literally happened. Period. If you question that, you're wrong. That's how it was.
And I guess there's something about religion, isn't there? This is something that atheism struggles to compete with, is that kind of hope and promise, the promissory notes that certain religions can give, whether that be heaven, well, particularly heaven. Like there is literally no greater thing in human conception than heaven. It's the greatest thing that you can possibly imagine. And if you can imagine something greater, that's heaven, right? So it's an absolute bribe, psychological bribe of the highest order, and the hope of salvation and the hope of this and blah 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 blah. So religion, and in this case Christianity, does a good job, and you can see why it would appeal to someone who was in your position. Whereas atheism, it's like, okay, right, you can get better, but let's take an evidence-based approach to this, right? Which is fantastic. It's hopefully, like percentage-wise, likely to work, but it's not promising you untold amazing things. It's just like, right, here's the evidence to suggest that if we do this, then you will probably get better.
There's an aspect of selfishness that, I'll speak for myself, where it gave me this powerful feeling of I'm special, I'm chosen, I'm saved.
Right.
Everyone else is, all the people that I grew up with that are getting careers and getting into real estate and getting PhDs or becoming doctors, they're all just a bunch of sheep that are going with the powers and principalities that be. And I'm the one that screwed up, but all of a sudden I find salvation. So I'm the one who's special and they're not, and they don't know what they're missing. I'm the one who did it right in this life. They didn't. I'm the one going to heaven. They're not. That's what it gives you. It gives you a feeling of being special.
And as Doc said, perfectly succinctly, Dathian doesn't have any IOUs to hand out. And that's what I've said with you in the previous video and some of my own videos, is that, as I said just now, heaven is a great thing in human conception. Hell is a worse thing in human conception. So if you are a Christian going about your daily life, doing whatever, it's really difficult to be genuinely moral, because every decision you are making is in the framework of, if I do this, I'm more likely to get the greatest thing in human conception. And if I don't do this, I'm more likely to get the worst thing in human conception. So therefore, I'm doing this thing in pure self-interest.
Right.
And it's really difficult to get away from that. So even though a Christian might be doing something for true, like morally altruistic reasons, there's also those things going on. And it's really difficult to tease apart whether a Christian is ever being truly moral. I mean, you can argue this with atheists as well. You can talk about whether altruism really exists at all. Is everything we do some form of reciprocal morality? So it's going to come back to you eventually, or whatever, or it makes you feel good, or whatever, so on and so forth. But the idea that the Christian, this is particularly so, and obviously so. Would you agree that? When you look back on yourself as a moral agent as a Christian, did you see yourself as thinking about heaven and hell quite a lot?
Yeah. And I used to think about it like this. I used to think about it like this. So the faith in my faith is what gave you salvation. It's Christianity 101, right? And I used to think that the fact that I believe and that I know that I'm going to go to heaven, it was like this thing that I felt like that you no longer had to fear death. It was almost like it's almost like you're pretending to not think that it's even possible that you might not be in heaven, right? So let me just clarify what that means. When you convince yourself that the moment you die, you're going to go straight to another realm and you're just going to wake up in an instant. When you convince yourself of that, you no longer fear the possibility of mortality and death. So it's almost like it's almost like you're trying to convince yourself that there's no other option besides this.
So this, in psychology, religion, and psychology in general, this is an idea called mortality salience and terror management theory. So this is one way that religious people, in this case Christians, with heaven, can overcome their terror of mortality and your understanding that, oh my goodness, I'm mortal and I'm going to die. But Christianity gives you but it's okay because I'm going to live forever, and it's your coping mechanism. There's loads of research to say that this is a really good coping mechanism that atheism doesn't have. Now, it's not to say that many atheists don't cope very well with death and the idea of death. I, for example, am fine with it. If I die now, I've had such a good life, and I've had kids, and I've hopefully given a good enough start, and I've done everything I want to do. Everything is the icing on the cake now. If I die now, do you know what? Good job. And I'm happy with that. But for many people, death is a real problem. And something like Christianity provides a really, really powerful tool to cope with death and mortality.
And I was just thinking about this too, because for a lot of people, it's a personal experience that they have in their life that gets them into religion. And for me, there's some truth to that too, because even before prison, I experienced psychedelics, right? And I had this particular time where talk about this on my channel a couple times, where I tried DMT, and the experience that it gave me made me think that there's something, I'm in some sort of, I don't know, there's something different. This is not, and obviously it's the chemicals that's doing this. But I mean, at the time period, I remember thinking, there's no way, there's absolutely something else. Like there is something. I don't know what it is. This is before I became Christian. But remember that seed was planted. That personal experience happened in a weird psychedelic weird way.
So DMT being a psychedelic drug, hallucinogenic drug. So you were thinking there's something else because of these hallucinogens.
Yeah, and that was like you hear that a lot of times, people when they try DMT or ayahuasca or even just like psychedelic mushrooms, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm convinced now that there's a God or something. There's something else out there," and the brain chemistry, like there's something really powerful about those experiences. Even without psychedelics, people have these experiences.
I had a similar experience in Australia when I was backpacking at the age of 19, and me and this girl, yeah, had an experience where it was pretty out of body for me, and I ended up going to hospital because I just freaked out. It was all just, I remember writing like 10 pages of A4 at the time. This is 1996. People didn't have computers to just like write their ideas down on. Like I was like, this is mental. I'm sure I've got that in the attic somewhere in the loft. But just a really mental experience.
But you can imagine how somebody would change their life after that, right?
Yeah. It's really interesting. Yeah,
And I think that's a huge part about what gets people into that religious mindset. Even if it's not Christianity, if it's something else, sometimes it's just they had a weird dream or they thought they saw something in the sky, something. A lot of times that's what it is.
yeah.
And then you can't convince them otherwise because they saw it. They know it's true.
Well, so when in researching the visions chapter for my resurrection book, a critical examination of the Easter story, the resurrection critical examination, Easter story. So there's the chapter on visions. I do a lot of research into that, and it turns out that most people, almost all people, think they have had visions or hallucinations, really genuinely think they're true and veridical. So it's like you're exactly right. I mean, it sounds almost obvious, but they're like, no, this genuinely happened. This was a real thing that happened to me. It's
because
so
then you go down the avenue of, well, what is real? Because you start thinking, okay, everything that I'm experiencing is in my brain, right? I'm talking to you, and my brain is processing the word, like the sound that's going in my ear, and my eyes seeing that, whatever. The process is the process. So then you start to think about, okay, yeah, I took a substance, but so what? What if that substance is some sort of key? This is not true, but this is what people say. What if it's some sort of key to some other greater dimension? Whatever, something. And then you start thinking, what is real? Once you go down that avenue,
of course, there's interesting theory of mind conversations you can have here, but there's something called synesthesia. So synesthesia is the ability of some people who have particular genetic makeup, and this is an argument to say that these experiences we have, these qualia, are dependent on brain states and on physical states. But there's this condition, synesthesia, where you can have different experiences for different stimuli. So, for example, you can smell numbers, or you associate there's like the experience of color with certain letters and things like that. So it's like it's almost extra to what normal neurotypical people have, and so therefore you can start talking about how you can have these other experiences, the whole other dimension, if you will, is unlocked through actually something physical like a drug or a genetic condition or something like that. But then people can misunderstand that and make miscalculations and end up with religion or religious experience, so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's definitely the case.
And you'll be happy to know, Natalia Emerson, Gnostic Informant is one of my go-to channels. Thank you so much for that. That's very kind contribution. Thank you, Natalia. And so it should be. He's a legend in his own underwear. This is indisputable truth. So when you got into this, religious worldview, you were in deep. What then made you start questioning things? What was your route out of this?
So this is the crazy part about it, is that what got me out of it is actually just the fact that I went so far into it that I had to. So the first brick to fall was the King James only thing.
Right.
So I was in a King James only church, and this is something that you can falsify. Like, is the King James Bible really perfect? There's nothing mistranslated. All the manuscripts add up. Everything's perfect, right? So you can check this out. You can look at the Texas Receptus. You could compare it to the Hebrew. So I started doing that. I started like learning how to read Hebrew. Looking at the manuscripts and watching Bart Ehrman and starting to get into all the textual criticism aspect of the Bible. That's when the King James only thing fell apart. Once the King James only fell apart, now there's a hole in the wall, a big hole in my foundation of religion, and now I can question other things.
It's
So
like a
it's
house of cards, isn't it? Then
yeah, it's
after.
funny. It's funny to me that people who I used to go to church with, who have been following this King James only religion for like 15, 20 years, I don't know how they do it. Like, how do you go that long in the age of the internet and not look up the King James Bible mistranslations? Just type that in Google and see what comes up. These are things you can check for yourself. It's not a matter of opinion anymore. These are facts that you can check.
So what's interesting there is I think you've kind of expressed this idea that the more constraining properties you put in place to a belief system, the easier it is to go wrong, right? For easy it is for it to be wrong,
Yeah.
right? So if you say, right, imagine your position and then add a few more things in, like, oh, you have to lean over to the left on a Tuesday, and your middle name has to be Johnson, and all these extra things because of this rule and that rule and this interpretation. You add, and then what you have is this really complicated framework whereby there's more chance of it being wrong because you're making more claims. Do you see what I mean? Whereas
Yeah.
a liberal Christian takes a step back and says, actually, do you know what? This book might be wrong, and it's up to me to find out which bits are right and which bits are wrong. Now, I'd say that has its own set of problems, because actually, is it a truer sense of what Christianity is? But do you know, for the more conservative Christian, in this case, like having more rules and more beliefs about the Bible being true, the more there is to go wrong. And therefore, when it does go wrong, you then start unpicking everything. Does that make sense?
It's exactly what it is. And I think that so there's the God of the gaps argument, where if you whatever we don't know, we just put God there, right?
Yeah.
But there's also this religion where it's like, okay, maybe the world's not 6,000 years old, but metaphorically speaking, Adam and Eve could have been the first people that lived, that were like, just godly people. Like,
Yeah.
you can start like making things up.
Ensouled. They were the first ensouled people, for example.
Yeah, and then you'll say stuff like, well, the flood, maybe maybe it was local, maybe it wasn't a world flood, maybe the world didn't really wipe out like the Bible says. And like, you start doing all these things to really, what you're doing is you're proofing yourself from debunking your own religion, because the Bible doesn't say any of that stuff.
Yeah.
The Bible says the world was flooded and there was 8 people left. It says that.
What you're doing is you're moving it's a pea in the shell game, and you're just like a sleight of hand that allows you to keep believing in your God by moving it. Okay, I can't have that, so I'm going to move it over here. I can't have that, so I'm going to move it over here, and eventually, you've tied yourself in knots.
Right. And that's why, like you mentioned, that's why the more liberal Christian types, I guess universalist types, they'll last longer. They have a better foundation, because really you're not gonna
Because have no foundation.
there's
Because
nothing there's nothing to debunk. It's all just it's all vague, it's all metaphor, it's philosophy, it's whatever. Whereas the world I was living in, this is literally what it says. This is literally true. If you believe in evolution, you're damned to hell. If you have the wrong Bible, you're damned to hell. All that stuff.
Mommy Vale comes in with a really interesting question here. Do you think the original church thought that the Bible was literal?
That's a good question.
We could talk about Paul, and whether Paul, whether there's an idea that symbolism was a genre, if you like, or an interpretative framework.
Yeah, I wonder, because the time he's talking about, the first century Christian or second century Christians, the Old Testament was already around for a long time. So you got to wonder, because if you actually look at the history of the Romans, they had their own history, where Romulus was the first king in 700 BC, but they have the Plato talks about 9,000 years before that Atlantis fell. So you got the Roman who's living in the first and second century has a choice to make. Do they believe Plato's history of the world, or do they believe the Old Testament history, which is 6,000 or 4,000 BC? And the later church actually does give us that date. But you gotta imagine there probably was some Christians living in the 2nd century that were doing the math and trying to find out when Adam and Eve lived. And I'm sure that's not that hard to do, right?
I mean, as Doc says, and that imagery in history had little distinction in the ancient world. And I think what we must also not do is think of people in the 1st century as if they have our knowledge now. So,
Right.
so we're, we are so knowledgeable, so vastly knowledgeable about so many subjects that people in those days just those subjects weren't even invented, weren't even discovered, weren't even things, right? We have so much knowledge that we take for granted.
Right. That's a good point.
And we will look at something like, I don't know, Noah's flood, and just so for someone like me, I was like, well, it's obviously mythological. I know that because I know the world is spherical. I know the world is round. I know how much water there is. I know what it would take for this to happen. And you do all these kind of analyses really quickly in your brain, whereas just that's not even on the cards for someone in those days. And so these stories are so much more plausible that the mythological stories, there isn't that huge gulf of distinction between a myth and fact, maybe.
No, I agree. And but I do think this, though. I do think their genealogy in Luke and Matthew are pretty clear. Like, it doesn't take a genius to look at this genealogy and try to get an idea of how old they're trying to say the world is. Because they're saying 14 generations between David and the Babylonian exile. 14 generations from the Babylonian exile to Jesus, right? I think it's what it is, 14. I think it's what it says. But anyways, whatever the numbers are, regardless, all they have to do is look right. It's all right there. It's not like they have to they don't need the internet for that. Yeah. So they can make estimates based off that, and then compare it to what they already thought about the world, which is they probably thought the world. They probably didn't know how old the world was, but they probably did have some sort of guesstimates out there, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and people did come along and then calculate this, and this was a thing, and so therefore it is. People took these sort of claims seriously. Origin has entered the chat. The idea here is that people like Origin would see some of the problems in the Bible and try and formulate ways of excusing these problems or understanding these problems, and then then you start saying, okay, this isn't literal, it's symbolic, and these kind of excuses or this rationale becomes more and more prevalent. I think for the early Christians, the other problem that I think takes place is that we again project ourselves onto early Christians by saying, well, we've got the Bible, and that has everything in place, and it's one book with one narrative that we've smashed together and made a 2,000 years of theology. We've made a narrative. But actually what was going on at the time is that there were huge amounts of different sects and groups of people coming up with different stories, and they won't have all read, like the Gospel of John wouldn't have even been written for these people if you're talking 1st century. And the Matthew might not have been written, so and so on and so forth. You got or they have been written, but this group won't have read it over here, and these different geographical positions, and everyone's got different ideas of what's going on. And it wasn't until all these kind of ideas were tied up as they were brought together and then theologically glued together with hundreds of years of theology. So I think to answer the question, do you think the original church thought the Bible was literal? I think in that creative phase, I think different sects believed all sorts of different stories about Jesus, and there was no one, coherent narrative.
It depends, because when you say the church, the original church, is there even an original church? I don't even think there is.
No, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah. So to the question, and thank you very much for your support, by the way, Mummy Vale. Do you think the original church thought the Bible was literal? There was no original church. That's
unless they mean 300s, 400s AD.
Yeah. Yes. Which then, and I think, then you start seeing early church fathers playing around with ideas, and then you start getting, heresy and orthodoxy, and it all becomes a bit controversial.
It's an evolution.
Yeah. but how generally, how do you get, like you talked about with liberals have a stability with their beliefs, because actually they can just move it around and adapt their beliefs to whatever piece of data comes along. Whereas conservatives struggle to do that, because if you start with, well, the Bible is 100% true, and then someone comes along saying, well, historically we found this fact, so it can't be true, then you're in trouble, right? But the liberal can just bend round and get around these problems, and that's when the liberal starts, allegory and symbolism become all the more important. But I don't know exactly when, historically speaking, the ideas of allegory and symbolism became really prominent.
Actually, from what I've been gathering from talking to a lot of scholars about this, the farther back you go, the less, I would say, fundamentalist you get. Like, for example, let me just throw this out there. There is a preacher from the 2nd century called the Nicene preacher, who was full-blown syncretizing religions, calling Jesus Osiris, Attis, Adonis, saying that he was the Phrygian corpse, which is another god. And then you have another example that I noticed is that I think it's the 3rd century, the Emperor Septimus Severus minted a coin that was in circulation in Turkey and Syria it says Noah in Greek letters, N, Omega, or the letter H or whatever. And it says, and then there's a picture of Deucalion, the character from Hesiod who survives the flood, because Prometheus tells him to build a chest that him and his wife can get on the chest and survive the flood. And so this emperor, whoever it was under this emperor, I'm not sure if the emperor made these coins or not, but it was under this emperor. Whoever made these coins was syncretizing Deucalion and Noah as early as the 3rd century. So, and like I said, and going back to the 2nd century, you got this Nicene preacher who's doing all this syncretism. And these are all condemned as heresy later on. They weren't condemned as heresy right away. There was no heresy right away. It was not until the 4th century where you start getting heresy. So the point is that I'm making is, the farther back you go, the closer you get to Jesus, the more spread out the ideas get, and the less heresy, the less fundamentalism there is.
Absolutely, because there is no conformity that's been set in stone by orthodoxy, by these meetings,
Right.
with Nicene councils, Trent and Nicaea and so on. That's what then says, right, this is how it should be. So before that, you've got all, and as you say, you're talking about syncretism, so you've got pre-existing sort of pagan beliefs, and then you've got Christianity vying for that. And so the success of that is sometimes by combining the beliefs in some kind of syncretism, and you get all sorts of different beliefs. But the larger journey, this idea that fundamentalist literalism, hyperliteralism, the Bible, some people argue, is a relatively new thing, like the last century, where people have sort of moved back to there being a hyperliteralism that actually over like the last 500 years, some Christians say, wasn't really that big a thing. Like that's only become, as in America particularly, this like hyperliteralist thing, which the sort of church that you were in.
Yeah. And like I said, it took an evolution of ideas to get there. Like it took the Protestant Revolution, it took the Puritan movements in England, it took the American Church Baptist movement. All of that had to happen for my church to get to where it was, the King James Bible only movement. That is all. Like, you can argue that this is a modern movement. This is not a remnant of how the old church was, or the true church. It's like, no, like we both were saying, the farther back you go, the more diverse the church is.
The church I grew up, says Ricky Johnson, grew up in only used the KJV and believed it was inerrant. They also believed that they were the one true saving faith. How could I stay when I found out the KJV was inerrant? Well, that's it. And as soon as these core pillars of any belief system, the more pillars you have, but each of them are necessary for that belief. You
Absolutely.
knock one of those pillars out, like the rest is irrelevant. One of those pillars is, so for example, in this case, that the KJV is inerrant. If you find out that's wrong, then actually the whole thing falls apart, arguably. So talking about going back to your deconversion, Neil, what was for you the biggest psychological struggle that you went through in deconverting? So when you had this worldview in place and you had this,
Sorry about that. That was editing video that just got finished. Sorry about
I
that.
just thought I'd said something
I did not think that was
truly.
going to happen, but sorry.
So what was your biggest struggle? You had all your social networks in place. What did you struggle with in deconverting?
That's such a good question, because
Right, thank you.
once you gain a family in a community of people that you are seeing 2 or 3 times a week, eating lunch with every Sunday, and doing podcasts, doing church podcasts with these people, and all of a sudden I can prove something that they are holding dear to wrong. And I bring that up. I bring these things up to people in private. Now, I don't walk in the middle of the church and say, "Hey, look, everybody!" But I go to I go to the one friend. "Hey, look at this." Oh, don't, whatever, bro. That's you're listening to all the bullshit lies. Like that was amazing to watch. By the way, it's amazing to watch when you can show somebody an undeniable fact, and you can demonstrate something in front of their own eyes, and they could still deny it right in front of you. That to me was amazing.
So
Watching
I've experienced that
another.
today. I've experienced that today, having a massive argument with one of my 11-year-old twins, right? And and I'm like, any kind of arguments red rag to a bull, and I because I know how to argue, and he's only 11, right? But he's like coming up with this thing, and it's quite a big argument we had, and I just completely deconstructed everything he said, right, as you'd expect a 45-year-old philosopher to do to an 11-year-old boy. Like, it's just like, this is unfair. But now you started this, I'm going to teach you. Right. So I destroyed his argument. But what was interesting is what he did next, which was all the kind of like attacking me as a person, denying this, even though he said that, and all these things that, like, you are probably have experienced with the people you were speaking to. But we see this in children, and these sort of hermeneutics and these mechanisms that we have in our brain, they start somewhere, right? And I could see them. And as I was having this argument, and as I was seeing him react, I went straight to, oh my goodness, this is the germination. This is a seed of stuff that then happens on the internet like 30 years later, and I can see how people react in the ways they do, and you are showing it here in its purest form. But sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's a good point, because I would go to people in this church, right, and be like, "Look at my friend Justin, who I grew up with. He's the one who got me in this church, by the way." And what's up, buddy? And so I go to him and I say, "Look at this is what the King James Bible says." Like, I think I was like 1 John 5:7, where it has all that extra text, and I was like, "These are what the manuscripts say. This is not." I go, "This is different. The King James is wrong here." Then I would show him, "Oh, look at this part. Lucifer in Isaiah 14. Lucifer. There's no such thing as Lucifer in the Old Testament. If you go to the Hebrew, it says Hallel. It's the light. It's the it's the morning star." Okay, and I'd show him this stuff, and like, Lucifer is a Greek Roman god from Ovid's Metamorphosis. I would show him, look, Ovid's Metamorphosis predates the New Testament by almost a century, basically. How is it that Lucifer is in the King James Bible? Like, this is just examples. It's a whole bunch of them. One of like 100 examples. I would show him these things that are wrong with the King James Bible, and they would say stuff like, "How do you know that all the other Greek manuscripts are wrong and the King James has the right one?" And I would say, "What do you mean by that?" And they're, "How do you know that every single manuscript in existence isn't wrong and the King James is the right one?" And I'll go, "Well, why would I think that?" I go, "Out of all the manuscripts in the world, the King James is the only one that has it right, and all the Greek manuscripts are wrong." And he would say, "Well, it's all about faith. I have faith that the King James Bible is right, so it has to be right." And I remember just being like, "Oh my God, this is insane. This is insane thinking." And then I started thinking, "Am I doing this in other areas too? Am I doing this?" So I didn't deconvert right away. I left that church because I knew they were wrong, and I went to another church. I went to I went to a speaking tongues church. What is it called? It was like a port. It was
with
a
glossolalia, like Pentecostal church.
Pentecostal. Yeah, it was a Puerto Rican Pentecostal church in the west side of Buffalo, and the pastor would speak Spanish, and his wife would translate it in English. And I'm the only person there that doesn't speak Spanish. And I don't even know why I went to this church, but I just went to it, and I got baptized again because I remember saying, "Okay, God, make this make sense now. I'm giving you all my faith." This is important, by the way. This is really important what I'm about to say, because this to me is proof that Christianity is false. Because the text tells you, if you give a mustard seed of faith, you will be saved. That God will make sure you're saved. All you got to do is try, right? And I'm sitting here saying, God, I'm giving you my all. I want this to be true. I have faith in you. Let me get baptized one more time, but make it make sense. Make the Holy Spirit come down to me and make this make sense. So I get baptized, and I remember being in tears. And I remember getting and leaving that church that day when I got baptized, and that was the last day I went to church, being baptized for the second time, because I went to a new church and I wanted to rebirth my Christian faith, and I knew that I was like, okay, the text says that if I give it my all and I give my faith, that I will be saved no matter what. And I tried it, and I just remember leaving that church being like, I don't have faith anymore. I lost it. It's gone.
But going back to what you're saying about like presenting these ideas to your fellow believers, it's all about the presupposition, right? So if you presuppose that Jesus is a fact, right, then like literally nothing you can say, especially if you've got the authenticating witness, self-authenticating witness of the Holy Spirit, like as William Lane Craig would say, you can provide me with any kind of evidence, and it doesn't really matter. It's water off a duck's back, because I know that this is true, and so therefore there must be something wrong with what you're saying. And this kind of like goes to I did this in a video recently, and I'm halfway through writing an article on it. This is from Hector Avalos's the late Hector Avalos, but his book Slavery, Abolitionism, and the Ethics of Biblical Scholarship. And on page 1 of the book, he says that my project actually began with a puzzling experience. If one reads almost any book on Christian ethics written by academic biblical scholars, one finds something extremely peculiar. Jesus never does anything wrong. Right, and he then goes on to talk about this, but it's like that even the secular academic people talking about, like, not maybe the new atheists and modern ones, but certainly in decades past, even the secular biblical scholars start off with this idea, well, Jesus is just perfect, right? And and then so how do we, etc., etc. And if you start with this foundation brick that can't be touched by any kind of evidence, then you're just going to be building this entire edifice that is utterly incorrect. And then if someone challenges you, they have to be wrong, because your axiom is a fact for you. It's just a self-evident fact, and you can't challenge it. Like, it's not challengeable by rationality and evidence.
And you always the fallback answer to everything, when you can prove somebody wrong and it goes against the faith, and it's one of these things that if this is truly proven wrong, then I have to back away. What they'll do is they'll say that Satan is so smart that he knows the gospel so well that he knew how to set up the world in a way that he can make it appear that you can debunk the Bible, but it's just because Satan set it up that way. Satan's that good. That's what they would say. I'm not kidding. That's what somebody said.
Yeah. It's a really common one, which is, and then you like, well, as you've heard me say, which is, well, Satan's just doing what God wills anyway, because if God could get rid of Satan like that, and Satan's still around, then Satan is just God's middle management executive. So,
thank you. They make it seem like Satan is smarter and stronger than God is.
Yeah.
Because, like for example, the last election, Trump lost, and they're like, well, Trump wanted God to win, and the only reason why he didn't is because Satan did this, Satan did that. Well, what are you saying? Satan is more powerful than God? He can win elections that God wants Trump to win, but he can't get him to win because Satan's better than him? Like, what? I don't understand that. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly. So the whole thing's complete nonsense. So you were coming in and presenting these facts to, or these claims of yours to other believers. They were having none of it, and
they have pastors from other churches contact me and try to
really
talk. Yeah.
So you were a bit of a problem. So this mustard seed that had just grown, like, of doubt in you, had grown into and was, growing.
I was somebody who was editing videos for the church, doing the live streams. So they weren't just going to drop me like that. They wanted to try to talk to me. So I had one pastor talk to me, and I remember showing him all the King James stuff, and he just was like, that was the guy who said, "How do you know that all the Greek manuscripts are wrong and the King James isn't right?" That's the guy that was a pastor who
Yeah.
said that to me.
Oh, really?
So yeah, and then another pastor came along and was like, "Look, I understand a lot of this can be, a lot of this can sound like, but you got to realize Satan. That's the other one." And like different people were trying to say different things and trying different approaches, and I just remember being like, "You guys are wrong."
And what's interesting, I find, is when you present so many problems, the Christian might present one solution to this problem, and then another solution to that problem, another solution to that problem. But when you actually track all the solutions, eventually, like, the solution down here is mutually exclusive to the solution they gave to you like 3 months ago down here. It's like, hang on, but that solution doesn't work with this solution. These two literally can't both be true. And it's like, wrap yourself in knots.
That's exactly how it was. That's exactly how it was.
And the classic, as you well know, is I was once told that Satan put dinosaur bones in the ground to deceive us. That's the classic. Evolution is not true, and the evidence for evolution is just put there by Satan. But yeah, God could control Satan, so that's just God.
And they'll say stuff like evolution just a theory. You didn't know that it's just a theory? Like,
yeah,
the
classic. Yeah,
yeah.
Just like gravity, but
right.
Just a theory. Go and throw yourself out a window and see how that goes. You were struggling with when you were presenting them with facts in that kind of like struggle, like, how can you like justify what you're saying to me, and that's all crazy and blah blah blah. But what was your biggest struggle in leaving religion? What was something that you found difficult to leave behind?
I just remember being like, there's no way that this universe has no point to it. And now this is my thinking at the time. I've come to a new conclusion now that there is a point. The point is that the universe is what it is, and we're just a part of it. And like, it's not like I went from a different position of being selfish to being, I have to be saved because it's not fair if I'm not saved, to the point where I'm at now, where it's like, I have to make a mark on this world that people can remember me by. So I have to make the world better. And then when I leave, I'm just as mortal as everyone else, just as mortal as that ant that got stepped on. I'm not special, and there's no reason that I need to be. There's no, I don't, I'm not, I don't. There's no reason that I have to be selfish in the sense that I have to live forever. So
there's humility to your newfound belief system,
right?
So you're more humble.
And I went from thinking that it's all about me. It's all about me living forever. I have to be saved because it's not fair if I don't. To, it's not. It's all about the world. It's all about me and how I affect the world, how people remember me by, how I will treat other people, and how I will contribute to the ongoing life of this universe.
So we're gonna have a discussion next week with a couple of universalists. So tune in next Sunday, guys, because that should be it's a 4-way discussion. But one of my best mates, who's a Christian universalist now, has had a really interesting journey, sort of in and out of. He was a conservative Christian, and then sort of went to a liberal Christian, and then sort of came out, and then has gone back in as a universalist. And I think what he struggles most with in not having Christianity, when he was flirting with not having Christianity, was the whole meaning thing. Right? It was like there can't not be any meaning, the ultimate meaning. And so what happens is, meaning to Christians is defined as ultimate meaning. So it has to transcend time and space. Whereas for you and I, it would be, well, we make our own meaning, and when we die, we die. But the meaning is with us, and the legacy that lives on after us, perhaps. So I can understand why if that's what you really, really want, atheism isn't going to offer that to you. So I get that, but it's can I live with that? I can. I don't, whatever. And I think it sounds like you can as well. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Disney film Coco.
No.
Coco's is a wonderful film. Like, yeah, I watch a lot of stuff like that with young kids, but that's a film that I often come back to in like what it teaches. So what happens is it's a Day of the Dead festival, and this kid like gets into the dead, where the dead go, and all these sort of ghosts or what have you. And it turns out that so the dead festival is you make a shrine to people, your loved ones, and you're remembering them, and that's how you remember them. And people exist only until they are remembered, and when someone doesn't remember them, that's when they finally poof out and go to it like another place. It doesn't talk about what that other place is or whatever, but I thought there's some lovely, really thoughtful ideas they're playing around with, that some of these great like animated films often have a load more thought to them than you might give them credit for. And Coco to me, it spoke about legacy and about as long as I'm remembered in the world after I die, I exist still in some kind of tenuous sense.
Yeah, that you exist in the memories of the people that you leave a mark with. Like,
yeah,
and
and,
that
and,
makes
and
you,
the changes you can affect.
yeah, and it makes you want to do better, not for yourself, but for the people around you. It makes you an asset to the world, to the ever going chronology of this world, where instead of just all about I have to get saved, I have to live forever, it's all about me, I have to get saved. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're saying I gotta save the world. It's actually a profound switch in your thinking.
Yeah.
Once you get to that point, all of a sudden you care about climate change. All of a sudden you care about the future of the children. All of a sudden you care about all this stuff. Whereas before it's like, who cares about climate change? Don't you know this?
Rapture, the end of the world's coming anyway. Let's bring it on.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And Mitch Mazarol, some folks eventually will accept our decision. So he's talking to Ricky here. So the reason I say this, because it might be pertinent to you, took my mother the better part of 30 years to accept his deconversion, I presume. But she's cool with it these days, and I suspect she's now an atheist herself. Interesting. Now, for you, when you left your religion, you said your parents were already liberal, weren't religious anyway. So were you coming out of the religion? Did it affect them? Were they happy, sad, whatever?
I never really got into it with them, but yeah, I never really got into it with them. I don't know how it's weird, because I never really brought that to the family, really.
Right.
Makes sense.
It was your thing that you did out there, and when you're back with the family, it's just life as normal.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel like you wanted to convert, you needed to convert them, or anyone else for that matter, to save them?
A little bit with my brother, a little bit. Yeah, I got to that point, but I also knew how they are, and I knew that there was just, if I didn't want to look like a crazy person at the same time. So I was like, I knew who to talk to about it, who to try to evangelize with, and who not to. I wasn't like a full blown evangelical going out and like I don't get me wrong, I did the door to door thing. We did that. We had days.
Right.
It was like every Thursday, I think it was. We would go out and we would do door to door
Witnessing.
But for some reason, it's easier to do that with people you don't know than people you
know. Oh, yeah. But
yeah.
We don't really have that in Britain too much. Like, we're so apathetic that anyone that comes to your door we still live in this like idea that like, oh, you can't talk about politics and religion. I think it's breaking down a bit more these days, but no one, like people that do door-to-door witnessing in Britain will get short shrift. It's not like America where it's kind of like culturally accepted. Here we're like, oh, get lost, jog on, mate. But actually, whereas I used to think and get annoyed with people who were that evangelical that want to try and convince other people, actually, when you start understanding that if they genuinely think these other people are going to go to hell unless I do something about it, then you understand witnessing and you say, well, actually, you are genuinely trying to stop them from an eternity in hell. So I suppose that's something.
But I agree with that to an extent. But this is a real thing that you got to remember this. There are people that are just doing it for the recognition, to show the church that they're, look at me, I'm going door to door. Look how good of a Christian I am. That is a thing. There are people that do that literally, and I actually, that one pastor that I used to go to, he showed his true colors because he told me one time that he only had one person get saved in 20 years.
Right.
So it's like,
wow.
he's not.
That's a poor conversion.
Yeah,
Of that.
exactly. It's not
So
Christ.
James, who's such a great supporter of the channel, thanks James for this. Fundamentalist religion did so much damage to my mum's brain that she'll never be okay. So her kids will never be able to have a healthy relationship with her, and she'll never, and she'll remain non-self-aware about it. Yeah.
Yep.
But would she think that? She'd obviously think that she's fine and in the zone and in a far better place than you are, maybe, James. I don't know.
Oh, that's a reality. If the people who get to that point, once they cross that line, it's like no matter what you throw at them, it's either Satan or you're deceived or the powers and principalities are behind it. Satan did this, Satan did that. The Democrats, the QAnons. The church I used to go to is very close to what QAnon type mentality. Yeah. Very close.
Yeah, there's such a close relationship with politics and religion in America, and in fact, the data suggests that politics is more fundamental than religion. So what? And one of the data points to look at in this case is when a church doesn't agree with people's politics, they move church. So actually, you'll find that people are really happy to move church rather than change politics. So people will more likely move church than change politics, which means that politics is more fundamental than religion, and people will adapt their religion to their politics. So that's quite an interesting point. But this is from Okeltier, probably mispronounced that and butchered it. Sorry. As long as a person is kind, I don't care what they believe. This is something I've come to more lately in my philosophizing, which is, whereas I used to be like me. Come across any Christian, I'd be like, you're wrong, and I've got to tell you you're wrong, and let's have an argument because you're wrong. Nowadays, I'm like, if your belief system doesn't morally affect me or the wider society or people outside of you, right, in a negative way, you can believe what the hell you like. I don't care what you believe in, but as soon as your belief system becomes morally problematic for other people, right, we're gonna have a problem.
I agree with that. Once you're like, I think people should go with things that give them fulfillment. But even if I think they're wrong, if it gives them fulfillment in their life, I support it until that fulfillment is at the expense of others' fulfillment. So, for example, an evangelical who gets fulfillment out of being an evangelical, but he thinks that gay marriage is wrong. He thinks that people shouldn't be trans. Now you cross the line. Now you're going into territories that affect people's lives.
Yeah. So Ricky Johnson says, I've been called the elephant in the room at family gatherings. They're really uncomfortable around me. That said, I can't talk about religion with them or they won't have a relationship with me. So this is how important sort of religion is well, you know, deconverting from within a family and a social network, which is very strongly religious, is a huge thing. Right, it's nothing I've experienced, and actually, you haven't experienced it because your family weren't like that.
Right.
But did you, to some extent, did you experience social ostracization from friendship groups?
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially leaving. Like then now I'm no longer even welcome there. Even though like just last year I was breaking bread and doing all this praying.
Was it that recent?
Well, not anymore. Now it's been almost 2 years, but yeah, it's been recent. It's pretty recent.
Yeah, wow. Great discussion. Thanks for sharing, Neil. Thanks, Ricky. That's really kind of you. Thanks for your contribution. Is that thanks for sharing, Neil? So thank you, Neil, for sharing, or is that thanks to me for sharing, Neil? No, because there's a comma there. No, thanks for sharing, Neil. I'm not sharing, Neil. That's thank you to you, Neil. Yeah, this is why punctuation is important.
Yes.
So thanks, Ricky. Really appreciate that. And Ina Roos, thank you again. She's great supporter. Exactly. I had the same attitude. I'm not sure which attitude this. Oh, right. What I was talking about affecting me perfectly. If it didn't affect me personally, it didn't matter to me. I've changed since. If it didn't affect me personally, it didn't matter. So you changed since. So now they believe that actually it is still important to correct people who are basically incorrect, even if they aren't.
I think it's important to have a discussion, but not try to be like, you're wrong and this is why. People don't respond to that.
Which is what Andy Hall here, laughing in disbelief, a fellow, when I wrote at Pathos, Pathiosa, and now I'm writing at Only Sky. He's now with me at Only Sky, or I'm with him. He says, I disagree, which is kind of where you were going with that, Neil. There's no such thing as a benign, crazy belief. We've seen the dangers of people who don't try to lead a rational or humanist life. Yeah, I do know a few Christians who have who are Christian, but actually they really aren't. They're really quite morally aligned with what I believe. So I'm less. But I wonder whether the question is, do they facilitate other people to have crazy beliefs who then go, you know, it's the idea that moderates not calling out extremists. You know, this theory that actually, like the hardcore right in America, is facilitated by the moderate right not calling them out.
Well, I think that the most important thing to them is salvation. So they'll probably be more likely to defend hardcore, fundamentalist types than to call them out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just because that's the thing that has them,
because it's their own in group.
Right.
So when you were starting to deconvert, was it when that first brick, popped out? Was it a fait accompli? Is it something this is going to happen? Do you think once that it was just a inescapable end conclusion, you were just right? It's just all going to fall apart, or do you think you could have been saved?
I thought that I was going to find the true religion or the true spiritual path. I thought that it would be, like I said, I dabbled with Gnosticism for a little bit. That's why I got the name Gnostic Informant. I even flirted with Islam for a short little minute too. Went to an imam, tried a service of an imam, and I wasn't feeling that at all. But I tried it though. I tried it, dabbled with the whole maybe it's just the Old Testament, maybe it's just Judaism. Yeah. No, it didn't work out. I tried everything. I did. Hinduism. Read the Veda. Bought an English copy of the Vedas. Read through that. So this is incoherent. They can't do this. But one thing I did like about them is they almost correctly got the age of the Earth right. Like they're not that far off. They're like in the millions range, like close enough, but not. No.
So here's an interesting comment, and this will be interesting to you, Neil, because we're going to be discussing universalism next week with Rob. Right, so he's come on and said a piece here, which is there an easier route to detrimental nihilism on atheism, ergo potentially harmful to the individual? So the idea here is atheism. Are you more likely to become a nihilist on atheism than on any given religion or Christianity, for example?
I don't think so. I don't think nihilism is necessarily a trait of atheism. You know what I mean? People say that, but I think that nihilism is just nihilism. Like it comes with personality traits rather than what you think about God.
Do you know what? I was just about to say that. I think if you're psychologically predisposed to that kind of thing, then it is to do with your psychology rather than the content of your belief system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
but is atheism an easier framework to allow that to come to fruition?
You could probably make that argument. Maybe you can make that argument. It's possible. I'm not going to say that. No, maybe it's not possible. But
the flip side is, do you end up just believing Christianity because it's wishful thinking, because it's not nihilism? So this is like let's believe that because it's not nihilistic. But actually, it says nothing about the truth. Atheism is more likely to be true, but I'm going to believe this because it's nicer.
Right, but then you see a lot. You see how many atheists that are humanists and who believe in people, who think that people aren't necessarily evil, that everybody has potential. That's not nihilism. That comes from a humanist worldview attitude, right?
As Andy says, gosh, I don't know. Are you more likely to have mental illness being embedded in a patriarchal Bronze Age belief system? Wow, yeah. Well, so to steel man what Rob being a universalist, he would move away from that Bronze Age version of it. But then, are you constructing? And we'll get into this next week, so I don't want to jump the gun here. But is he constructing a worldview that fits his philosophy? And that is not to say that's wrong per se, that is the wrong approach, rather than looking at evidence and constructing a worldview from like data in the world around you.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But we'll come on to that next week.
Right.
So I wanted to get onto, so we've gone through your deconversion, and here you are as a YouTuber, now talking about atheism and critical scholarship of the Bible and religion, and I appreciate you for that. And we are your new family now. This is your new social network. All these people talking here, and so hopefully you can still have an active,
Absolutely.
you can still
Network.
hit those buttons, those needs outside of organized religion. I wanted to speak to you, and we had a little chat about this before we went live, which is I've now written something like 4,500 articles and blog posts, which amounts to some several millions of words, literally. And I've written a dozen books, and I've done a whole bunch of YouTube videos, and I'm now a feature writer and economist, etc., etc. My point being that I've done an awful lot of thinking about all this stuff. And I've now got to a point where I look at some of the Christian claims, for example, and I think, oh my goodness, I'm starting to lose respect for people who believe some of these claims. And rather than having more respect, getting to know them better and having more respect for these beliefs, I'm now starting to think these are utterly ridiculous beliefs. How can you still believe them? And there are so many ridiculous beliefs. Do you feel this at all? Do you look back on some of the beliefs and how did I believe some of these crazy claims?
Yeah. I mean, there's some, like the flood, for example. The flood. You have to believe that the world was literally covered in water. It's literally physically impossible. You have to bend the laws of physics for this to happen. And I'm sitting here for X amount of years just thinking that, yeah, it's a flood. Of course it happened. What do you mean it didn't happen? What are you talking about? Everyone knows it happened. I look and I look at people who still hold that, and I'm like, how do you not see how insane that is to think that there was a global flood in 2700 BC?
And it's insane for a whole load of reasons. I've written articles which list 25 reasons, and then I stop there because it's like I haven't got any more time. But here's 25 to get on with. But you get the philosophical reasons, like why would God, if God has divine foreknowledge and knows the future of all freely willed decisions and knows all the future, designs and creates humanity, but then gets to a point where he says, "Oh, it's all gone wrong," and then sweeps everything off the table and starts again.
Wrong again.
And it's like,
and you would think Noah is this perfect upright man, so his offspring is going to be good, right? No, within 2 generations, already evil. There's already Nimrod. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it doesn't work. So the idea is he starts again, but he should know it's going to go wrong and make a different design choice.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't get to this point where he has to start again. And in starting again, you are killing all of humanity by 8 people and all of these billions of animals and ecosystems, right? So there's a philosophical problem with it, and it doesn't work because humanity appears to be just the same.
No different.
So yeah,
arguably worse.
Yeah, you could say. And there's not enough water molecules on Earth in order to fill up the Earth with water to the top of the mountains. It would implode the Earth's crust. How would you get koalas from Australia and sloths from, et cetera, et cetera? All of the argument. You can't build a boat big enough. The physics doesn't work. Fresh water would kill off all of sea life, but we know that coral has been alive for 10,000 years, right? We know that there's coral that's 10,000 years old, and the weight of the water would have crushed it, and the fact that it wouldn't be salty enough for them, so etc., etc., etc. I could go on and on. The fact is, you've got all the data to suggest that the story is absolute nonsense, and yet people still believe it.
Right? Yeah, it's just.
And what other crazy beliefs from that you would have entertained?
So let's see. I'm trying to think of the there's you got the donkey one. You got the age of people living for 900 years, for example. So this to me is a big one. Abraham, he lived for 900 years, something like that, 700 years, something crazy, right? And it says that he won all these battles in Syria. So You have a guy who lived for this many years, who is in the historical record in these fighting these wars. He's a general or whatever. You would think he would be all over the historical record, leaving his footprint everywhere, leaving archaeology everywhere. Nothing, zero, zilch, doesn't even exist until hundreds of years later, 1,000 years later, arguably.
It's insane. And then you've got Nephilim, and then you've got, you know, these giants that roamed Earth. You've got the Behemoth, the Leviathan. You've
Exodus.
got these.
There's no house of Israel in Egypt, and all of a sudden there's an Exodus. No archaeological evidence of that. There's no Israel until hundreds of years later, and then it's supposed to be a house of Israel in Egypt that gates their independence. It goes in an Exodus. Where's that?
And so
Egypt has the best record keeping in world history. They wrote everything on the walls in Luxor, in Heliopolis, in Alexandria, all over the entire country of Egypt. They have their history written all over the walls. There's not one thing about an Exodus.
So, and the Exodus is super important because it kind of is a foundation for the later Christian belief. And when you see as Jesus as a new Moses, when you see the law, the importance that has, and the covenant code and all these kind of legal codes within the Old Testament, the Exodus is how that happens. And then when you start looking at the claims of the Exodus, which is that millions of enslaved Hebrews are walking out of Egypt, but there's no evidence of this, as you say, but also that God kills the firstborn of the entire nation. Like, the entire nation is very clear in Exodus, the entire nation of Egypt, including all the cattle. You know, there's absolute decimation. Now, if you believe your God is love, God is love. God is omnibenevolent. But you hear this saying, God is love. Does love translate to killing the firstborn children of an entire nation of people because the Pharaoh said no, but God hardened Pharaoh's heart such that he would say no?
It almost makes the case for predeterminism. And then in that case, then what the hell is the point of love? You're just making it happen anyway.
So so given that there are all these really problematic stories in the Bible, and we could even talk about the resurrection of Jesus and throw that on, and or transubstantiation that Catholics believe, that they actually on every Sunday that their wafer turns to the actual flesh of Jesus and the wine turns to the actual blood of Jesus. They actually believe that. Like, now, if someone came from another religion, from another country, and said, "This is what we do in our religion," you'd say, "That's weird cannibalism." And I'm just almost going to laugh at you. If I don't laugh in your face, I'm going to laugh in my head, because that's obviously ridiculous and I'm never going to believe that.
Right.
So why is it that we accept this within Christianity?
Well, I'll give you an example. In India, the river Ganges, they thought that was a goddess named Ganga, and that she came down from heaven and gave herself became the river Ganges so that people can have water to drink, clean water. And we look at that like, that is ridiculous. We know water is water and it comes from the ocean or whatever. But they're like, that's just what we believe. It's just what we were told. But like, we think of that as crazy. But like, we're over here in the West, we think a guy was put on a cross and that his blood gives you eternal life if you drink his blood and eat his flesh. We think that's real. And that's literally true. But the Ganges thing, we laugh at that. It's just one of those things that you look at and when you take a step back, it's all the same.
So why is it you think that happens? I mean, I can answer my own question, but I'd be interested in what you have to say.
We're so used to it. We grow up. It's in the culture. It's embedded in our culture. We grow up. Our parents, our grandparents, their parents, their grandparents, their grandparents, going all the way back until we go back to ancient Rome, until the church started. This has been the thing that's been from generation to generation for 1,500 years now.
Yeah, so my thesis is that when you are told, when you listen to songs and see cartoons and are read stories from the age of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, you know, that kind of age, before you understand the world around you, before you know what's plausible and what's implausible, what's probable and improbable, you are being told this stuff. The animals go on to the ark 2 by 2, hurrah, hurrah, and all that kind of stuff. You're like, okay, Noah's Ark, flood happened. Yep, that's in there. Jesus resurrected, that's in there. All this stuff is in there and it's embedded. And then you learn what's plausible and implausible. Then you do science lessons. Then you go through adolescence where you're like working out how the world works. And then you apply that to new knowledge claims. You apply that to new claims that come to you from other religions. Well, that's obviously nonsense. The Ganges, that's obviously nonsense because blah, 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 blah. But you don't apply that to claims that are already embedded in your own mind. These claims have bypassed the veto system, and they embed in there culturally because of your experience, and your elders and your authority figures are telling you it's all true for literally for a decade plus. This doesn't obviously explain how converts come to believe these things, and maybe that's a whole different psychological kettle of fish. But certainly for those who grew up through that, it's normalized.
Right, and I think that's the thing. It's like it's so embedded in our culture that, like, for someone to convert to Christianity who wasn't growing up religious, even that person, it's just it's like there's no other avenue to go when it comes to religion. In the West, people are Christians mostly, not everyone, but for the most part. If somebody's going to turn to religion, they're going to become a Christian, just like in Saudi Arabia or Egypt or in Iran. Somebody's going to turn to God, they're going to become a Muslim. Or in India, they might become a Hindu. Or in China, they become a Buddha. Like it's a lot of it's geographical if you think about it.
Yeah, John Loftus wrote a really good book called The Outsider Test for Faith, which, one of the many claims in the book is you look at a map of the world, right? And religion is geographically set up, and whereas you look at like who believes in gravity, right? Well, that's pretty much everyone. Scientific claims are broadly, doesn't matter where you're brought up, but yet theological claims, it's where you're from. And what better explains the geographical distribution of belief? And actually that's an argument I deal with in this. Everyone should go out and buy this book, 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, Heaven, Hell, Satan, Divine Design. I'll send you a copy of this, Neil,
right,
if
cool.
I haven't already. But that's a great book, and everyone should buy it. You don't have to read it, just buy 10 copies, that's fine. So you get this, and one of the things I meant, do I mention in that I'm talking about it in my Exodus book that I'm writing, and I'll be interested to see what you think about this. But the idea of normalization, Neil, is that, like we talk about, that if you are told these things over and over and over, the more you're told something, the more credible it becomes. We know this in political campaigning. We know this from advertising. It's how advertising works. Coke, Coca-Cola. Oh, what am I going to buy? Coca-Cola, right? It's there. It's that's called the mere exposure effect. Well, there's also the effect of, like, the more you're told things, the more credible they become. So if Donald Trump says something ridiculous, but he says it 200 times, it becomes more credible. And they've done loads of research on Facebook and the spread of misinformation and disinformation on Facebook, and they have found categorically that exactly this happens. The more people say something that is overtly ridiculous, the more credible it becomes. Right. So then when you take that data and apply it to religious claims and say, oh, Noah's Ark, cartoon song, Sunday school, sermon, authority figures, parents telling you all this stuff, you're like, oh, right, yeah, that's pretty reasonable.
Yep. Yeah, it's like we said, like you just said, it becomes embedded in the world around us. It's in the atmosphere. It becomes normal. Like we still have schools they're Catholic schools and Christian schools and Catholic universities, and these are things that are objectively, I think, false. But like, yeah, it's a Catholic university. Who cares? You're going to go to mass every Sunday. It's part of your curriculum. Like, that's just it's part of the culture.
That's a really interesting point, Neil. So you don't have this in America, but in the UK, we have faith schools because we're not a secular country. You guys are more religious and we're more culturally secular, but actually institutionally, we are not secular. So actually 37% of primary schools, elementary schools in the UK are faith schools, right? They're just run by dioceses, right? But you can have a Muslim school, you can have a Church of England school, you can have a Catholic school, you can have a non-denominational school, right? if you're a government, you're looking at all of these belief systems, right? They cannot all be true, right? They cannot all be true. So what you're doing is you're saying you can set up a school to educate children. And I know categorically that not all of these schools can be true, but you can set up a school and you can educate children in such a way that you are literally teaching them falsehoods. At least, say there's 5 different positions here. At least 4 of these are false, right? And yet we're going to allow you to teach these kids stuff that we understand is false, but we're allowing religious freedom.
It gets even crazier, because I don't know about you how it is over there, but over here we have what's called drug court, where you end up in a court system where you see the judge once every 2 weeks or something, and you're required to be in going to meetings where there's 12 steps, where you have to pick a higher power, and all of a sudden you're going to court and you're mandated by a judge to pick a god. Like, that's how deep it goes. It gets into the legal system.
Yeah,
I'm not even joking. I'm not even joking. There are requirements in drug court in the United States where if you're not following the 12 steps or doing what your sponsor tells you to do, and which is getting a higher power, which is part of the first 3 steps of the 12 steps, you'll go back to jail. I'm not kidding. I'm not asking anybody. You could go back to jail. They'll say, "Oh, you're not following through with your program. Okay, you don't want a higher power." Most people, the way around is they just lie and say they found a higher power, even if they didn't, because they don't want to go back to jail. But that is a thing. They could literally say, "You're not complying with your program. We're putting you back in jail." So people who get nonviolent drug offenses, who don't follow through with this sort of religious attitude, can face jail time. That's a reality.
Yeah, I mean, Britain is certainly somewhat different. I mean, Rob here is saying that, they just think religion's all the same. And so this is an argument that religious education needs to be done well. But it's not just about religious education. It's about science education. So if you've got a school, and we do have like minimum rules, so they do have to teach X, Y, and Z in the science curriculum, but they get around this and it's all a bit of a problem. But even to say that Sunday school or Muslim school or these things on a weekend that you allow children to go to. Now, as an adult and someone in like government position who gets to think about these things, like you'd be like, okay, not all these Sunday schools that everyone's doing can be correct. So there are at least some of these children we are allowing to be told falsehoods. It's the idea that it's fine to teach children stuff that is absolutely incontrovertibly false, because these are mutually exclusive claims, and I find that a real problem. Yeah. But then I suppose if you're someone who's say a Pentecostal believer, right, and you're like, well, if I want my Pentecostal Sunday school to still operate, I have to allow everyone else to operate theirs. Like, it's really difficult to single mine out. So it's like either all or nothing. I don't know, and then it seems a bit like too much like hardcore authoritarian communism or something to say nothing. No one can have Sunday schools, or so. Yeah, these things are difficult.
Yeah, it's like it's one of those things that you look at and you're like, okay, this is already a thing. You can't just wipe it all away now. Like, it's part of the structure of our society.
Yeah. And Rob rightly says, it's about non-partisan, religious pluralism. It's not saying you can't have religion, but we need to be really careful in what we teach our children. So therefore, what we teach them needs to be non-partisan, and we can still teach them about religions, but not that a particular religion is incontrovertibly true. So
yeah,
like you guys, as in he means Americans, are sort of doing. How, I mean, I don't know this. You went to a school in America, even though it's a secular country. How much has religion bled into the school system in a way,
it's there. Like, it's there. Like, you see it. You see it in God We Trust, and the songs that you're singing with the chorus, and it's just part of it. It's just part of the fabric of this country. It's hard to explain, but it just is.
So I've got this funny situation at the moment where I've got twin 11-year-old boys, right? And they've never really, apart from like a couple of weddings, they've never been to church, right? So they've never experienced singing hymns. and they don't know the hymns and that whole cultural experience that you and I have had, like learning a repertoire of hymns, sitting in a place, listening to these stories, listening to these sermons, the experience of being in a church. They don't have that. It's not in their experience at all. Do you think my children are missing something? Do you think that they will grow up having a lack of something?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think that we have music and film and art that can replace the sort of whatever that was in our psyche. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? What I just said?
Yeah, well, it's a bit like the Sunday Assembly, right? So with this idea that you can go on a Sunday as an atheist to a group of like-minded people, sing some songs, and have that togetherness. And
yeah, but you know what though? To circle back to what my answer, how does it have to be organized? Is that like a must? Because I think you could be watching Netflix at your own time, at your own leisure, and it's not like it's like a set schedule. Like Seinfeld's on 5 o'clock every day. It's like, no, you pick at your own time, but you still have a shared experience with someone else that watched it an hour before you, and you go on the internet and you talk about it in a blog or a Reddit post or something. So we still have these shared experiences. Maybe they're not singing hymns in a church, but it's like some sort of like borrowed, like shared experiences through other forms of art. I think art's the answer. I do. Not just music, but like, film and plays and all that stuff and paintings, everything.
Eric Graham says, I teach religion in the school system here in Sweden, and I'm an atheist. But I tell my students that it's just stories, and we are only studying the stories just like the Spider-Man story, which is very nice. I don't know that in America you get away with saying that so easily. Hey, it's just a story like the Spider-Man story. Like you'll get a lot of angry parents.
School story and its history too. It tells us, when you read these stories, you read the Old Testament, you get a glimpse of the thinking patterns of the ancient world, how they thought. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So absolutely. So as we move toward, and if you've got any questions, guys, any super chats, please get them in as we move towards sort of wrapping this up. But Neil, as a former believer that went through sort of different churches and whatnot, what do you think was the worst biblical thing that you believed, and what was the worst opinion you had that was derived from your religious network, or even from the teaching of the Bible?
I would probably go with thinking that I just thought this is a funny one. This is stupid, but it's to answer your question. I used to think that a couple people in my church used to say that Hebrew is the Father, Greek is the Son, and English is the Holy Spirit, because we were King James onlyist. So we had to rationalize why English mattered. So we made it a Trinity. Hebrew is the Father, Greek is the Son, and English is the Holy Spirit. Like, come on. How annoying is that? I used to say that.
But I mean, the lesson here is that you can rationalize anything, if you really want to.
Just it fits. It sounds good. It's three, right? Three languages, Trinity, God, Father, Holy Spirit. It matches. What? Let's make it work. Make it happen then.
Do you think in leaving religion that you have evolved as a human, in morally speaking? Is there any? Do you think, in what ways do you think you've become a better or a worse person?
Well, like I said before, now my focus is on the world around me rather than myself. I become there's something that there's like an automatic switch that is turned when you go from caring about getting saved and living forever to caring about how you're going to affect the world, because you know that you're not going to live forever. So in order to live forever, you got to live in the hearts and minds of the people that you leave. So that makes you by default a better person.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is too difficult a question for you to answer. I mean, emotionally difficult. Your brother had a difficult experience recently, and I don't know if you can talk to that. But with regard to, you had a friend who was religious, or who is religious, and concerned with prayer and praying for your brother and where that went. Is it all right for you to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, because I had a friend who thought that.
What happened with your brother?
Well, he nearly died in a overdose, and he is like
It's a twin brother, right?
twin brother. Yeah, he has a permanent brain damage now, and I had a friend who was thinking that his prayers is what kept him alive, and that he would have been dead if it wasn't for his prayers. That I should be more grateful for his prayers, and then if I was more grateful to his prayers, he might have been healed more. He'd be like fully like that was the conversation we had basically.
So that went south.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't talked to that person in months, so
Yeah, because I find this. I debated miracles on Unbelievable Radio Show and with Caleb Jackson, who we'll be speaking with next week with Rob. And I had a debate about miracles, and I've got this argument that sporadic miracles are an argument against God, right? So when miracles don't happen to everyone and universally, and if it's just one random person being picked out and can suddenly walk, but no one else can, and everyone's still injured or unhealed.
8-year-old girl who is innocent that dies of a brain tumor. Where was the prayers then?
Yeah, exactly.
But some guy who's like, questionable with his lifestyle, that person gets prayed over and he gets healed. You know what I'm saying?
Goes to faith church and like they heal him and he can suddenly walk and all this stuff. You're like, So there's an argument against sporadic miracles that argues to the fact that God doesn't exist, or to conclusion that God doesn't exist, or God is not all loving, but also to the idea of not quite healed people. And I've used your brother as an example in a couple of conversations. I hope you don't mind, but I find it quite interesting that okay, if you genuinely believe that God does miracles for some people and heals some people but not others, and there are certain people like your friend who believe that God healed your brother but didn't quite heal him back to where the point he was, to the point that he's actually in quite a problematic scenario in a position. Would that be right? Is he impaired?
Yeah.
Like cognitively impaired.
Yeah.
So he's got, like, God has done this miracle, but it's like a half-assed miracle.
Yeah, it just doesn't. No. Yeah, it's stupid. It's like why even go there? Especially when you could factor in how great heaven is, right? Why not just bring him there then? And then they'll say, well, he didn't get saved yet. He needs to get saved now. Well, that's why he's doing this, so we can get him saved. We should go get him saved right now. It's like, but he's not even mentally there anymore. So why would that even be a thing? If he can't even decide if he wants to be saved or not, if he can't even decide to have faith, then what's the point of him dragging it out? Right?
Absolutely.
It makes no sense at all. There's nothing you can say to rationalize why that would be the case.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and well, thanks for sharing that with us. I know it's probably quite difficult. Andy says, I work with men and women who have brain injuries for 20 years, and my heart goes out to you. It's tough. And I suppose when you're a Christian, you have to, and this is something I say quite a lot because it's true, right? Which is, if you're a Christian, or if you are someone who believes in omni-God, all loving, all knowing, all powerful God, every bit of data, every experience you have, everything in the entire universe needs to be explicable in terms of omni-God, right? There is not one thing that can just be like, oh, it's just random or whatever. Like, if God is all these things, then everything that happens has to happen in the context of an all-loving God. So it must be in the context of this universe being all-loving or perfectly like good or whatever. And so whether that be your brother's scenario, whether it be the fact that, I don't know, Jimmy didn't get a job that he was wanting to get, would it be the car crash that happened, the Ukraine war, a tsunami that kills 240,000 people, or you like banging your knee in the morning, like literally everything, or why we see in the color spectrum that we do,
right,
literally everything needs to be explained in terms of God, God.
And it doesn't look good because you look around, you see people have birth defects, you see people getting in car accidents that are just random and just like getting hit by a bus out of nowhere, and like Doesn't look good. Doesn't look good.
Every day, you go through experiencing things that happen, and every day, you as a Christian, you would have to explain 100% of what you see in terms of God, and it's just counting the hits and ignoring the misses. When you pray, it's like, oh, this has happened, brilliant, praise be, thank you, my team won, or whatever. It's like, and there's 50,000 times you prayed and nothing happens. It's like, whatever.
And then the one time it works, the prayers got answered.
Yeah, prayer's really good. I advise it, but I'm still going to go to hospital with this problem. But other than that, prayer definitely works. God's work ethic is so bad, he's unemployable. It is something of a problem. Thank you, James, for your support. So as we wrap this up, Neil, thank you so much for this Easter chat. We didn't even get to, I put in the title resurrection. Okay, like quick thing on a resurrection. What's your opinion on the resurrection of Jesus? What's your opinion?
I think that there was no tomb. I'll go with Bart Ehrman on this, and the reason why. First of all, Bart Ehrman looked up he went to every Greek and Latin manuscript that exists about people who got crucified. None of them, zero, zilch, nada, ever went to a tomb. So what makes you think? Now, I heard inspiring philosophers say he won't even debate an atheist if they don't believe in the tomb. What? Think about this for a second. What makes you think that a guy from Nazareth, who's a rebel, who's a criminal, who comes down to Jerusalem where he doesn't know anybody, all his family's in the north, he comes to a city that nobody knows him in, he gets in trouble, he winds up crucified. What the frick makes you think that he's going to get a tomb? Do you understand what goes into a tomb? How expensive it is to build a tomb? How hard it is how many resources you need? How rich you had to be to get a tomb?
It's actually the Jewish law that you cannot bury the wicked next to the righteous. So you cannot bury,
right?
Especially with Jesus, his crime was supposedly the worst crime there is. Blasphemy, high treason.
There's no way.
There is no worse crime than that in terms of Jewish law. And he would have been stoned. He would have been hung up on a post, and he would have been buried in a shallow grave, or in the criminal's necropolis, right? In this sort of, and he's
That's
small.
What I think happened is, I think that either they left him on the cross, and then once he was rotted to the point where he was like a skeleton, they threw his remains into the ditch of Tartarus, like they did.
I disagree with that, and I'll disagree that I used to think that, and which is what John Dominic Crossan, and actually Bart Ehrman talks about leaving bodies on the cross. The Jewish law is you can't leave a body on the cross after it's dead, after sundown, or on a post, right? So the Jewish law is you would have to take it down. And there was a treaty that the Jews, and you can imagine the Jews of Jerusalem particularly had with the Romans, such that they had a bit of wriggle room so that they could still fulfill their own Jewish legal practices and rituals within a certain context. And it would have been highly unlikely that the Jews would have allowed even crucified people to be left up on a cross to rot. So my conclusion is that Jesus would have been taken down by sunset. So that is another.
I thought the Romans don't care. I thought the Romans just
but they don't care. But then they also did have an agreement with the Jews, such that they could fulfill their own. In fact, in my book it details this. So I would, and Richard Carrier, I changed my mind having a long conversation with Richard Carrier privately, where he disabused me of this notion. So I used to believe that he would have been left out on the cross, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, he would have been taken down, but then put in a criminal's graveyard. So the Jewish law, the main thing is he definitely wouldn't have been put in. Oh, my phone's going.
Right. No, that's what I was getting at. Depending on how long he was on there for, whether it was a few days or whether it was whatever, I'll even grant that you're right.
Yeah.
The fact is, there was no way that somebody's putting him in someone else's tomb, and they're not building a tomb. They're not building a tomb in 3 days.
Yeah. So a new rock-hewn tomb that would have had a.
If there was a tomb built, it was somebody built it, and somebody paid money to get it built for a family member. It didn't. There's not just empty tombs laying around for some random guy from some criminal in Nazareth. That's not a thing.
Yeah, yeah, and even if there was an empty tomb that was ready to be used, you wouldn't have put in a body of a blaspheming criminal, and that would have been that's the really big big
That,
thing.
that
And
was one of the
so
things that Bart Abram was telling me, that when people built tombs, it was they were preparing it for someone else in their life. Like it was for a grandparent that's going to pass away, or it was for yourself or for your wife or something. You didn't just have, oh, we're just going to use state money and just build a bunch of empty tombs for people that die. That wasn't a thing.
yeah,
Period.
yeah, and so he would have been buried in a criminal's graveyard probably in Jerusalem. It would have been a necropolis as opposed to a shallow grave, because I think there would have been too many bodies for a shallow grave in Jerusalem. But here's the interesting thing: talking about an empty tomb, Bart Ehrman used to think there was an empty tomb, and he's actually changed his mind recently. I say recently, I don't know how many years ago, but he's changed his mind to say there isn't an empty tomb. So he's willing to now deny that. And I'd say empty tomb is definitely a later embellishment. I've done videos on this, how there's loads of really good evidence to suggest it's a later embellishment.
I don't even think Paul mentions the tomb, does he?
So no, Paul doesn't mention tomb, and this is one of the reasons why.
And you would think that would be the first thing he mentions, is because that's a big deal.
So because it's Easter, I will repeat this. People would have seen my videos on this. So
yeah,
Paul doesn't mention the empty tomb.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, it's inference to the best explanation. What's the best theory here? Atheism or theism or Christianity? Right. So Paul doesn't mention the empty tomb. Mark mentions the empty tomb, but not any of the appearance stuff afterwards. It sort of ends at the empty tomb. Matthew is the next gospel along, and he has the empty tomb, and he has guards at the empty tomb. So the question is, why does Mark not have the guards? So my theory would be, and this is many skeptics will argue this, is that there's a really interesting chronology that goes on here. That the guards at the tomb very much looks like an apologetic, a counter apologetic from Matthew to explain why the body couldn't have been stolen. So you would have had an empty tomb. Mark starts off with the empty tomb story narrative, right? He says there's an empty tomb. The Jews then hear about this and they go, hang on, how do you know the body wasn't just stolen? So Matthew has to come back and say, this is because there were soldiers at the empty tomb. And the whole soldier thing is really problematic for a whole bunch of reasons. So the story thing is definitely not true, and it only appears in Matthew, right? So Luke and John, I think, look at this and go, nah, it's really a counter polemic against. So we know Celsus and other Jewish people were saying that the body was probably stolen. So Matthew is a counter apologetic to say the body wasn't stolen because there were guards at the tomb. It didn't exist in Paul's time. Mark's community was the first people to present this. Now, the reason why I'm assured of this is that if it had existed in Paul's time, Mark would have been the one presenting the counter apologetic, right? So he's had 20 odd years plus of having Jews being able to react to Paul saying there was an empty tomb, or the people around at Paul's time saying it, but that didn't exist. Jews weren't saying that because the empty tomb story didn't exist, and that's why Paul didn't include it, because it hadn't been made up yet. Mark is the first to make up the empty tomb.
And then you got to factor in that if there was an empty tomb, this clearly would have been a holy site for the earliest Christians. They would never forget that is the tomb that he resurrected on. We need to mark that spot and never forget it.
Yeah.
Obviously the birth site, that's not really the birth site, but still, you would think they would have a site like that too, right?
Yeah. So, and again, that's one of my last chapters in this book is on the veneration. Why there are some counter arguments to say that actually it might have been venerated, but Jerusalem was raised at the fall of Jerusalem, and but I'd say on balance, the fact that there is no veneration of the tomb up until it was discovered by Constantine's mother is evidence that there was never an empty tomb and it was just made up.
But the biggest thing for me is he's not from Jerusalem. He doesn't have family in Jerusalem.
Yeah,
he's a criminal, and you're not getting. That's it. That's the end of it. You're not
100%. Absolutely 100. So there is no empty tomb. Mark makes up an empty tomb in order to start. So this all fits into the theology that the gospel writers are reacting against the more Gnostic kind of belief that it was, and Paul's belief that it was a two-body, it was a spiritual body that was resurrected, but the real body would have remained dead, right? So that's what Paul believed.
Yeah.
That's what Paul believed, and I talk about that in my book. There's a whole massive chapter on that in the book, which is why Mark says no, it wasn't. It was a physical resurrection. It wasn't a two-body resurrection with a spiritual resurrection going and leaving the body there. The body got up and resurrected, and we know this because there's and what's my evidence of this? The empty tomb. Matthew then comes along and says, I agree with that. It was a bodily resurrection. And not only that, I'm going to counter the arguments of the Jews who are saying the body, how do you know the body wasn't stolen? There were guards at the tomb. Luke then comes along and saying, I'm going to agree with all that. But not only that, I'm going to add in the fact that Jesus was eating fish, right? So as an appearance, it was definitely a body because he ate fish. And John comes along and says, I'm going to agree with all of that, but I'm going to add the fact that Thomas gets to poke Jesus's wounds and stuff like that. So what we've got is this general evolution of the type of resurrection that took place, and we've got an argument to show that the empty tomb was made up by Mark and never existed.
That's it.
Boom. Drop pen. And thank you, Vaguely Agnostic, for your very kind contributions. I really appreciate that, and I equally appreciate this, which is I'm going to buy all of your books, sir. I love the something. I'm not sure what that is. I'm going to imagine that's he loves something about me, or this, or you. So Neil, thank you for allowing me to have a rant about resurrection there and Easter. Where can people find you?
YouTube.com/Gnostic Informant. That's it.
Yep, and I showed which is your at Neil Sendelak 1.
Yep.
There's only one. And before you go, I'm going to hit you with your quickfire questions.
Sure.
So you're not allowed to think about these. What's your favorite fiction book?
Fiction book. The Bible.
Nice, good answer. Brilliant. Next one. What's your favorite non-fiction book you've ever read?
You know what? This is just right now, I guess, because I just read Symposium by Plato, and I really thought it was a masterpiece. So I'm gonna or Lucan's. Actually, this is what I'm gonna go with. Lucan's Civil War. This is the Civil War about Pompey and Caesar. And I know it sounds like some nerdy history. No, it is written like a true masterpiece. It's an anti-war book about how horrible war is, how bad it is for your country. It's way ahead of its time, thousands of years ahead of its time. Lucan's Civil War is my favorite nonfiction book.
Brilliant. What's your favorite movie you've ever watched?
The Departed. I don't know why. Just love that movie. The acting is amazing. The director is amazing. The writing, just that is a perfect movie. DiCaprio, perfect movie. The Departed.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
A favorite series? TV series?
I would say Game of Thrones.
Nice. Yeah. Always good. Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos?
Elon Musk.
I didn't even give you what the comparison is about.
Oh, okay. I thought
no, I did, but that's exactly what I meant. So now you're going to justify choosing Elon Musk, even though I've given you no metric.
All right, what's the metric?
No, whatever you want. I want you to tell me why you chose Elon Musk. It was quite an easy choice for you.
Seems more human. Like Bezos is like, you just feel this like fake attitude coming from him where he's just all about money. He doesn't pay any taxes. Whereas Elon Musk is like, he'll go on, hop on a podcast and smoke some weed and talk honest for a second and like give you who he is. Like, you know who Elon Musk is. You don't know who Jeff Bezos is. You have no idea who that person is. That's not the real person. It's some fake version of himself that he puts out there.
Interesting. Okay, if you could see a band live that you'd never seen before, dead or alive, they can be dead or alive, who would it be?
I'd have to go with the Beatles. Just the most iconic band you can think of, and you said dead or alive, so
yeah,
that's what I'd go with.
Yeah, that's respect. Okay, 2 more questions. Last Supper, right? You're just about to be executed for, I don't know, believing the wrong thing, and you're going to die, and you get your last meal your favorite meal, one assumes, unless you're going to punish yourself just before you die. What meal are you going to have?
I would probably have. That's a good question. Just give me some like chicken parmesan with some linguine and some good sauce.
Okay.
I'm half Italian, so I just
I love that. Give me some chicken linguine, chicken parmesan, chicken linguine, and some good sauce. Just like generic, just like any sauce, as long as it's good sauce.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I'll do that for you. So that I get to choose what your good sauce is. Brilliant. So you're just about to have your face eaten off by a zombie. It's a zombie apocalypse. And you are going to run away to your fallout shelter where you get to hang out for a month, and you get to take 3 people with you, dead or alive, but you can't take family or friends. So what 3 people would you have in the fallout shelter with you for a month?
So it can't be family or friends. Alive or dead?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd probably go with Albert Einstein, because I would do want somebody who's just a genius. Then I would go with somebody interesting. I would probably pick what's that girl who sings the song "I'm trying to go to rehab"? What's her name again?
Amy Winehouse.
Amy Winehouse. I don't know. I just thought of her.
That'd be a messed up month, but yeah,
entertainment and fun. Someone to have fun with, and entertainment, and someone interesting. So I'd pick her. And so you said 3, right?
Yep.
And then the third person, I'd probably go with Alexander the Great. Someone who's ready to go and fight and whatever. Someone strong and willed, and
I'd probably upgrade Albert Einstein to someone like Sean Carroll or someone that's got more recent knowledge. But I love that. I was down the pub this weekend with a reunion of friends I haven't seen for years and years. And I came up with this question. I was like, this is a question I say at the end of a lot of my YouTube interviews. And I was expecting a couple of my mates to just come up with these really insightful kind of 3 people. And they're just like, someone's really good at cleaning, someone's really good at cooking, and someone I can have lots of sex with. And I was like, oh, brilliant. Right, okay. Right, fantastic. Yeah, great. Well, we are down the pub and we've had a few beers, so I'll let you off with that. I was expecting Plato and this and that. No, none of that. So there you go. I'm glad you went down the route that you did. So thank you, Neil. Do you have anything to add to this conversation before we go?
Well, like I already said, go to Gnostic Informant on YouTube and subscribe, and good things will happen. Blessings will come your way.
This is true. I've seen it happen. I subscribed to him, and ever since that moment, I've been blessed. I don't believe in the correlation fallacy. It is causation. And ever since that moment, look at me. I'm blessed. I've been blessed with more facial hair. I was blessed with a nice glass of wine. Thank you. So do that. Go and please subscribe to him. And thank you so much, Neil, for supporting me and what I've been doing as well. It means a lot.
Thanks for having me on.
And thanks. And please check us out again next week with Rob and Caleb Jackson, where we'll be talking Christian universalism. So we've got our homework to do, Neil.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, well, take care, everyone. Thanks for all your support. Thanks for your super chats. Thanks for your lively conversation in the live chat. You've been brilliant. We have been probably less than brilliant, but we've still been here. So that's something. Thank you. Question everything, particularly yourselves. Toodle puts, everyone. Been a pleasure.